Welcome to part 8 of the Great War. Now we're going to take a look at the Treaty of Versailles. So, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the war came to an end, right? The shooting stopped. And now the negotiations for the peace afterwards was being negotiated. And it'll be negotiated in the Palace of Versailles, the palace created by Louis XIV, the Sun King, the time of absolute monarchy in France, right? Now, Woodrow Wilson is going to show up, and he's got a whole list of ideas that he already wants to see end up in this Treaty of Versailles. And he refers to them as the 14 points. If you take a look at this picture here on the right, you see here is his shorthand version of the 14 points, right? I don't think anybody can read that today because, honestly, it's his own shorthand. He invented it himself, only he could read it. And so even if you took shorthand classes, you probably still would not be able to read this thing. Now, I'm assuming that C on there is probably the grade he got on it. At any rate, he has 14 different things that he wants to see. And people like Prime Minister George Clemenceau of France and Prime Minister David Lloyd George are absolutely offended by Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. They can't even believe it. As a matter of fact, George Clemenceau said, 14? Even the good Lord only had 10, right? And David Lloyd George said, you know what, the Americans are trying to buy peace at a discount. Basically what they're saying is that you were involved in hard combat for only 6 months, and yet you come here with 14 different demands to be in this treaty. Now, he is going to get some of this, but he's not going to get all of this in this in the Treaty of Versailles. You can see some of the things he wants here. Open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, removal of the economic barriers, right? Reduction of armaments, right? Adjustment of colonial claims, conquer territories in Russia. Russia's not even here at Versailles for the negotiations, right? Right now, you've got the Bolsheviks in control. You actually have American, British, and Japanese forces trying to support the provisional Republican government fighting the Bolsheviks, so they're not even in this negotiation, right? Preservation of Belgian sovereignty, restoration of French territory, redrawing the Italian frontier and redrawing the borders of Austria-Hungary and the Balkans, limitations on Turkey. Now, the one thing that he wants the most here is you take a look here, not this independent of Poland that I forgot to mention, but the creation of an association of nations. Basically what he's saying is, look, no more secret treaties. That didn't work. That caused all kinds of problems. That's what caused all this. We need to have a central organization where all nations are members and that everything is negotiated with transparency, right? This League of Nations, as he wants it to be called, will be able to negotiate settlements so you don't have a global war ever again, and this can be the war to end all wars. Now, this League of Nations is pretty doomed from its very start, right? Because, first of all, there's a lot of issues with this. The United States is never going to join it. The United States doesn't join it because, well, as I mentioned before, Woodrow Wilson thinks he's the smartest man in any room he enters, right? And so when he negotiates here in Versailles for the final peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, he never at any time of this conducts any kind of discussions with Congress as far as what negotiations should be there. Why? Well, because he's smarter than any of these guys in Congress. They should just go ahead and go with whatever he decides. So when he returns with this treaty and goes, here, Congress, ratify this. Remember, the United States isn't part of a treaty unless Congress ratifies it. They're just like, well, hold on a second. You never consulted us about this. What the hell is this League of Nations crap? Right? Other nations might have a say on our policy? I don't think so, buddy. So Congress is going to refuse to ratify the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles because Woodrow Wilson, who felt he was smarter than them, that they should just do what he says anyways, never consulted them. Matter of fact, he's even going to go on a campaign to try and get it ratified, going to different states, giving speeches saying, get your congressman to ratify the speech. And he works so hard trying to get support for it that he ends up having a major stroke in Pueblo, Colorado, and spends the rest of his presidency literally learning how to eat again. Here we actually have, in my opinion, our first ever female president, Edith Wilson. Because When Wilson had his stroke, he didn't turn over the reins to the vice presidency. The vice presidency didn't take over because the president was incapacitated. Why? Because Edith was taking care of the recovery of her husband. People would show up to the White House. We need to talk to the president. No. But it's really important. What do you got? Let me look at it. All right, he's going to tell you do this, this, and this. Now just go do it. Get the hell out of here. She directed everything. So as far as I'm concerned, that counts. It's not official, but it counts. All right, so Woodrow Wilson gets what he wants with his League of Nations, even though it's doomed to fail from its very beginning. Because, again, think about it. You've got a League of Nations in which the major players are not going to be involved in, or some of them. You know, the United States isn't there because Congress won't ratify the treaty and join the League. Russia's not there because they're in a civil war, right? They're not allowed at the negotiation table, and there's no way that they're going to allow the Bolsheviks to join the League of Nations. Germany's not allowed to join because they're the losing party here, right? They're not at the treaty negotiations either for that very same reason. The treaty is going to be imposed on them. They're not going to have a negotiating voice in this. China ultimately won't join it either, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So the League of Nations is pretty much doomed, but that's what Wilson got, right? The other European powers had ideas of stuff that they wanted as well, though. And the one thing they wanted was that they wanted to make sure that the Treaty of Versailles was punitive against Germany. Matter of fact, many Germans were really shocked when the final treaty was presented to them because they had heard about the 14 points and they thought the treaty was going to follow those lines, which thought, okay, well, it's not horrible. But then the actual treaty comes down and they're like, wow, we can't believe this, right? For example, Germany is going to lose 1/7 of its European land area. It's going to be divvied up amongst the other nations, and all of its overseas possessions will be taken. The German's army is going to be limited to only 100,000 men. That's going to be the maximum size, right? And Germany is also banned from possessing a general staff for military planning, submarines, heavy artillery, or an air force. You're not allowed to have any of these. And the government established in order to conduct all this is going to be a republic called the Weimar Republic. So the monarchy, the Kaiser, is gone, right? He is going to be deposed, and he's going to go into exile into the Netherlands, right? And then finally, the treaty says that the war is Germany's fault. Article 231 of the treaty is known as the War Guilt Clause of the treaty, and it just straight out says, Germany, the war is all your fault, right? And you got to pay for it. So it's going to call for reparations that will be off and on paid. Like, for example, Hitler won't pay any reparations during his time in power. And in fact, the final reparations will not be paid until the year 2010, right? So Germany gets really brutalized by the Treaty of Versailles. It's no wonder that there's some resentment that's going to help grow and fester and eventually lead to the rise of the Nazis in Germany, right? But there's more to it than that, too. You also have some nation building going on. For example, another monarchy that's gone is the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, right? It's gone, and Austria-Hungary is going to be carved up. It's going to be carved into 4 nations. Hungary and Austria are going to be carved out and separate. You're going to have the creation of Czechoslovakia, which is going to be a combination of Czech and Slovak people. And since all those Slavic people want a nation of their own, we'll give them one. We'll create a nation called Yugoslavia because, you know, there's no difference between a Bosnian and a Bosnian-Herzegovinian, right? Yeah, look at a map today and then ask that question again, right? Poland is going to be carved out of Russia, right? So we're going to have the Poland reestablished. It had been gone for a long time. Now it's back. I mentioned before, you know, the books I'm going to write, that first one. This is why Poland is, you know, needs to have a book written about it called My Neighbors Suck, A Short History of Poland. It's going to exist, but by 1939, it's going to be gone again for a while. Okay. The Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will be created, right? And so you have a lot of nation building that comes out of this. Meanwhile, you're also going to have the Chinese delegation there trying to get those 21 demands, that series of harsh treaties imposed by the Japanese on the Chinese rulers at this time, which is, again, in flux because of the collapse of the Qing dynasty. They're trying to get those overturned. And in the end, all of them will be affirmed in the treaty. right? So you're going to have the 21 demands against China. The Japanese control over spheres of influence over China are going to be affirmed by this treaty. Matter of fact, that's so bad that China is going to be enraged, and they will be the only nation to walk out of the actual signing of the treaty. Of all the nations that were involved in the negotiations, China's delegation will get up at the treaty signing and walk out of the conference, refusing to sign it. Woodrow Wilson was there. He signed it, just Congress didn't ratify it, right? Matter of fact, the Chinese refer to these negotiations and the Treaty of Versailles as the betrayal of Versailles, right? So, but as you can see, the Treaty of Versailles is going to leave so many unanswered questions that it's really no wonder that a little bit more than 2 decades later, you're going to have Europe plunged into war all over again.